So thank you for joining us. We have a couple of questions that we're going to be addressing that we've gotten submitted earlier. So our first question is from Adele, and the question is how much should someone have in their savings account?
So in your savings account, typically that's a great place to store your emergency fund. And typically a good amount to have in your emergency fund is at a minimum 3 months expenses and then, at a maximum 6 months expenses. So that amount is going to depend on exactly what your expenses look like. So it'll be a little bit different for everybody, but think of emergency fund as 3 to 6 months expenses, and that's a great place or a great thing to do with your savings account is use that as your emergency fund.
Yeah, it also depends on your comfortability with how much you like to have available in a safe place that's easily accessible. So if you're someone that wants to have something more that looks like looks like 6 months of living expenses, that should be a little bit higher. If you're okay with $5,000 in your savings account, then it's kind of up to your discretion and your comfortability level. The second question is, what percentage of your income should you save into your savings account?
So I would say the general rule that you hear and that everybody will say is try to save about 10% of your income for your future. Now that 10%, depending on where you're at in your financial situation, maybe will be going to your savings account if your main goal is building up your emergency fund. But if your main goal is saving for something like retirement, maybe part of that 10% should be going towards a vehicle there. And then I would say another way to think about it is to think of a specific goal. If you're trying to save for something specific, say, a down payment on a home in 5 years, set a dollar amount for your goal, and you can always work backwards from there to determine how much you need to save in order to get there.
Cool. Thank you. So, just for an example, if you're making, let's say, 50 grand a year gross and you want to save a certain percentage into your savings account or any other type of vehicle, we recommend starting kind of at least with 10%, or as Alex said before, just starting anywhere. So if you can start saving $50 a month, start there and then build on it.
Yeah, definitely always a better strategy to start, with something that you're comfortable saving, and then just looking at your budget each month. And if you didn't miss that amount that you're saving, trying to increase it until you kind of reach that limit. There's no reason to try to save too much and place yourself into financial difficulty, have to take out debt, early withdrawals, things like that. Not worth it. So definitely start with an amount that you're comfortable and just set sort of, way to discipline yourself to check to make sure, you're checking regularly to see if you can increase your savings over time.
Yeah, and when you're saving and just starting to build the habit, you just want to focus more so on consistency so that you just get used to it and you can spend without having to think about really cutting back and changing your lifestyle a lot. Just you start, be consistent, and just build on what you can save. The second question was submitted by Andrew, and this question is about long-term care. His question was, who really needs it and what kinds are out there? So we'll start with defining what long-term care is first.
Yeah. So long-term care is basically, typically this is something that happens to people in their senior ages, but not always. But when you become disabled, right, and you're no longer able to perform your normal daily functions, right, typically you'll need some sort of assistance. Now that could be in-home assistance, having a caregiver or having a family member care after you, or needing some sort of facility assistance, so like a long-term care facility or a skilled nursing facility. So those are all different types of long-term care, right? And so long-term care can be very, very costly. So the reason this question comes up is because, because it can be so costly, it's usually something that you want to try to prepare for and have sort of plan to pay for in the event that you end up needing some sort of long-term care.
Yeah, so I'd say the people who really need it, who would most likely benefit from it, is someone with no kids who is single, and who is a woman. So the reason for those things is because typically when you're married, you kind of have like a built-in caregiver. Oftentimes, and this is not always the case when you have kids, they might be your caregiver down the line. Also, with women, we typically live a lot longer, and cause of death is typically not sudden. It's usually like drags on for a little bit, just as you're unable to do activities of daily living. So you're more likely to need some type of long-term care assistance, whether that's in-home care or being in a facility. So those aren't the only people that could benefit from it, but those are definitely the people who will really need it.
Yeah, like Tori said, those are the people who are like the most likely to need it, but it's something that can happen to anybody or can impact everybody. And like I said, it can be really costly. If you look nationally, if you were to need some sort of facility that you go to, nationally, the average cost of a facility is around $5,000 a month, right? And of course, most of us live in Southern California, and housing prices and property prices are way higher here. So it's something that in retirement, if you needed, could cost, along the lines of $10,000 a month. So, that's a pretty big expense. Some people will do a really good job of saving for retirement and have enough money in their accounts to, help pay for some of those, costs, right? But even when somebody prepares well for retirement, has a big nest egg saved up, if they need long-term care, that can drain their retirement account a lot quicker than maybe they expected to. So maybe they won't, leave behind as much of an inheritance, or get low on money later in retirement. So even somebody who's done a really good job of saving can, protect against the risk of long-term care in order to preserve their retirement assets and their portfolio, so they don't have to touch it for any unforeseen reasons.
Right. For example, my parents are 9 years apart. My mom is younger than my dad. And so he kind of has, as he gets older, he'll have someone to take care of him. And, if my mom wasn't around, my sister and I would probably step in to take care of him as well. But in order to protect, the possibility of him needing to be in a facility or have a caregiver at home, he has his own long-term care policy, although he's married, has kids, and is a man, because he wants to make sure to protect his assets. So that's something like long-term care, and the cost of long-term care doesn't deplete his assets, so that he can pass on money to his kids and do whatever he wants to that's more fun in retirement.
Yeah. And like Tori said, so not every single person will need long-term care insurance, but every single person will need some sort of long-term care plan, right? So that can involve your own savings, that can involve your own family members, or it can involve long-term care insurance. So it's definitely something that everybody has to think about, but doesn't necessarily mean every single person needs to go out and buy long-term care insurance. If that's something that you do determine that you have to do, there's lots of different kinds of long-term care insurance out there. You can get long-term care insurance on its own, right? That just covers, that cost alone. There's also lots of policies that combine both life insurance and long-term care insurance. So those are called hybrid policies. And even some life insurance policies will have riders, which are little additions to them that might involve some sort of long-term care protection as well. So there's a few different ways that you can, get that long-term care insurance, and obviously that's something that Tori and I can help you guys walk through if you want to schedule an appointment on our website.
Yeah, also different types of policies, just really quick. There's something called an indemnity policy, which means that your long-term care benefit can pay out cash. So if you have a child who's maybe not working to take care of you, you can just pay them out of pocket from the policy when it pays out when you start collecting. That's indemnity. A reimbursement type policy is a policy where you get the receipts that you've paid, maybe a long-term care facility, and you turn in those receipts and you get reimbursed from those expenses. They have to be qualified expenses. So typically for flexibility, a lot of people prefer indemnity type policies, but That's going to be a little bit more expensive typically. So kind of shopping around and looking at how much you need, if you need it, and what type of policy is something that Alex and I have helped a lot of our clients with and can help you with too. And even if that's not part of your conversation for your own plan, this could also be a conversation for your parents or grandparents too.
Right. And like we mentioned, the idea of needing long-term care is probably something that won't impact you until you're in your retirement years. But the earlier you start planning for it, the better, especially when it comes to insurance costs. When it comes to pretty much any type of insurance, the cost is based off of your age and your health. And typically, now is the moment where you're at your youngest and healthiest. So even, if it seems like a problem that's, years and years away and may not affect you, starting to plan now could, help you save a lot of money and stress in the long run as well.
Right. So if you have any questions about savings, how much to save, and long-term care, you can always send us a message or visit our website to set up an appointment. Next topic is Alex's blog post. So if you visit our website, you can see the tab that says blog, and it has a couple of our articles that we've published on there. The last blog post we posted last week, and it was authored by Alex, and the title was Coronavirus and...
I think it was Coronavirus and the Consolidation of Power.
And the Consolidation of Power, right. So just a couple questions about that article. What inspired you to write it?
Okay, so definitely we have some pretty big things affecting our entire society. Two of the ones that were top of mind at the moment when this came to me was obviously the coronavirus pandemic, and then the stock market, impact of the coronavirus pandemic. And when I thought about those two, big potential issues, I noticed some similarities. So I decided to write on some of the similarities, the way that both the coronavirus and the economic, basically, crisis that's been going on over the last couple of months have had a similar impact on their different industries. So, for example, when it comes to the stock market, it really becomes apparent that the strongest companies, the companies that went into the pandemic as the strongest companies, are coming out on the other side as the stronger companies by even more, right? So some consolidation of power when it comes to different companies and the stock market, and this is really apparent when you look at the numbers for the year so far. So for example, when you look at the numbers for the S&P 500, which represents, the 500 largest stocks in the United States. It's a market index that people use to talk about the stock market as a whole. As of last week, we had pretty much gotten back to the same point in the stock market that we started the year at. So we obviously saw, a pretty big decrease in the month of March, right? But have seen most of that recovered. And this was based off of the numbers last week. We were at about, even for the year. Now, if you look at the S&P 500 closer and you just zoom in on the 5 to 10 biggest stocks, some people will call those like the FANG stocks, which again just represent the largest of the S&P 500 companies. If you look at those companies' performance year to date, the FANG index as of last week, when the rest of the market had just gotten back to even, was up over 10%. So even throughout this whole market crisis, the biggest and strongest companies, name brand companies that we've all heard of and are all using, on a daily basis, have increased the distance between themselves and the rest of the pack when it comes to the market. Now, we don't know if this is, a trend that's necessarily going to continue, but I just thought it was interesting to see that when we had a market, collapse like we had in March, it really resulted in the consolidation of power to the biggest and largest companies, which is just interesting. And I related that to the impact of the coronavirus pandemic itself, right? So in kind of as a society, we rely on our government to make decisions for us that will, be for our own greater well-being, right? And a great example of that was the stay-at-home orders with the coronavirus pandemic. So essentially, when the coronavirus pandemic hit, the government stepped in, did their job, and gave us those stay-at-home orders. And even though that is their job, that's a huge act of government power. So I was just drawing the parallels to in times of uncertainty and unrest like we've had over the last couple months in both the stock market and in just kind of our society as a whole, we've seen kind of a consolidation of power. And again, we'll kind of keep an eye on things and we'll see how that ends up playing out for the rest of the year. But it's just, again, something interesting to note is that when kind of we face adversity in these two different fields, we saw consolidation of power in those areas.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So segue from that, what the heck is going on this week with the market?
So this week in the market, we've seen some volatility in the negative direction for the first time in a couple of weeks. And I think, I don't know exactly why, but it seems to me that the stock market in the short term is responding very strongly to news, right? And over the last couple of weeks, we've seen that mostly in the positive direction. We've gotten positive forms of news, news of reopening, news of, coronavirus not being as bad as we thought, news of unemployment not being quite as bad as we thought, and that's caused positive reactions to the market. So that's where we really saw a really strong market surge over the last couple of weeks. I think this week we saw the same thing except with negative news. So this week we got news that the unemployment numbers that we originally saw maybe weren't as good as we originally thought, and then also got some more negative coronavirus news as well, and the market responded in the negative direction. And I think kind of the reason for that is after all that we've been through in the stock market this year, in general, investors are feeling, timid, anxious, cautious. So they're reacting even more strongly to the short-term, news stories. And, that can impact things in a positive direction if the news is good, but can also impact things in the negative direction if the news is not good. And I think, again, this week we just saw kind of some of that in the negative direction.
Cool. And our Chief Investment Officer, Gene Goldman, has predicted a U-shaped recovery, so not necessarily a recovery that would look like a V-shape where we see a sharp drop and a sharp increase, or a sharp recovery back to kind of where we were before. Not so much an L-shaped recovery where we saw a sharp drop and just kind of low numbers, and not so great of a recovery. He's looking more so, and other portfolio analysts are looking more so at a U-shaped recovery where we're slowly but surely, and well, I guess not so surely, with a little bit of volatility in the meantime, kind of get back to almost recovered as we start getting back out into society, start spending money again. Restaurants are opening up at 25 to 50% capacity. Gyms aren't open yet. So as things start to open up, there will be some volatility in the meantime, but portfolio managers and the Chief Investment Officer of Cetera are optimistic.
Awesome. All right. So next, I'm going to just kind of ask Tori a question. So Tori's been doing a great job over the last couple of months of putting together our marketing and our website and things like that. So I just wanted to kind of see, given the coronavirus situation, the stay-at-home orders, how have you adapted your business to keep it up and running even during these challenging times?
So we have really ramped up our website. We've made it pretty user-friendly where you can visit toriandalex.cetera.com to see just a little bit about us, all of our contact information, our list of services. So what types of financial planning services do we offer? We have our blog on there. We also have our different events, and we've pivoted from live events and dinner workshops to our webinars. So if you visit our website, we have a couple to still put on there, but that's where you'll find the most up and coming events. And then on there you can also schedule an appointment with us. So we've adapted Calendly, which is a way to schedule an appointment with us, and looks at our calendar and gives you guys some times and dates where you can schedule. We've also been doing literally all of our appointments on Zoom. So those have been going really well, and I think for the most part, our clients have been able to adapt that pretty easily. We've been able to share their quarterly statements and review them on Zoom, no problem. And our Cetera has also adapted e-sign for pretty much everything now. So we are likely going to continue doing Zoom appointments and doing kind of paperwork electronically as well.
All right. So last question for Tori. And this was one that I know you already wrote kind of like a blog post about, but just wanted to ask for some of those that are still out there. With my stimulus check, if I received a stimulus check from the government because of the CARES Act that was passed a couple of months ago, what should I do with my stimulus check?
So in the blog post, I think we posted it about 3 weeks ago. The first thing that someone should consider doing if they need to is to pay their bills and not look back. The stimulus check was to help with either paying rent, paying your car payment, paying just for food if you need it, in case you've lost your job due to the pandemic. The second thing that you can do is save it into your emergency fund. And as we touched on earlier, we want to have ideally between 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. So if you are able to, I would suggest to save it into your emergency fund so you get close to something like 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Another thing that you can do with your stimulus check is invest it into a Roth IRA. So the way that a Roth IRA works is that you put money into the account and it grows tax-free. Once you hit 59.5, you can take distributions tax-free. So it's a retirement account meant for retirement. So ideally, if you put it in there, you're not touching it until you retire. Another thing that I would suggest to do with your stimulus check, if you have any left over by then, is to invest it in a Roth IRA in stocks. So as Alex mentioned, the stock market just now, or I guess last week, kind of just broke even, at least the S&P 500. The market was down about 5 to 6% yesterday. So it's still a really good time to buy shares of stocks because right now we are down from all-time highs that we were at the end of February. So it's now a really good time to buy low. Especially in a Roth IRA where you can see tax-free growth.
Cool. All right. Well, we're coming up on 1:30. Could you just let everybody know what our schedule is for these Instagram and Facebook Live sessions, and then where they can get in contact with us?
Yeah. So we'll be having these 30-minute Q&As every Friday at 1 p.m. So if you have a question, you can send it to our email, which you can find on our website. You can also send it to us via direct message, and you can visit our website. It's www.toriandalex.ceterainvestors.com. The link is in our bio, so if you click that, it'll take you to our website. There you can see our blog, and you can also there's a contact us tab where you can submit a question and that'll go straight to our email. If you also have more questions on long-term care and you want us to expand a little bit more, you can also set an appointment with us on our website. Thank you so much for joining, and thank you all for the questions.
Yep.
We'll see you next week.
Happy Friday and have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend.
See everybody later.
Bye.